We human beings are always driven by sometimes some rational aspect, and sometimes it's just happens. Every individual is different, and first I'll start with what I consider as the natural order of things when you look at the world. For almost everything to be successful, you need two, regardless of differences, whether it's color or gender or religion, or, two at least, a pair. That's why we have two hands, that's why we have feet, so two eyes, nostrils, so just to say, generally, it is important to observe what nature has created, and that reinforces a belief or not so much. In this case, when it comes to women's economic empowerment and women's empowerment generally, it is a given, being an African and born and raised most of my life there and living with Africans, I can see that most of the development of a house, most of the way a house is taken care of, most of that responsibility, even if officially it falls on the shoulders of a man, it's actually the woman or the ladies in the house who do the real work to make it happen. If you just leave it to the man, it won't get done the way it should be done. So, I grew up in this environment where you can observe, and as a kid, you observe and you learn through it. And I'm also fortunate to have 7 sisters, same father, same mother. And that has made a huge impact on me, because I know what they are capable of doing inside the house, in school, and on a daily basis. So there's no reason why outside of that circle they shouldn't be empowered because of their gender. Because I know, I've seen them grow. I've seen them doing on a daily basis things which matter, which makes difference. So if they can do it in the confinement of a household, they can also do it outside. So that's actually a strong, strong, strong belief. And all the studies you see now coming out saying, well, if we just empower women, then societies will be better off. It's based through an empirical evidence, through something we've all seen. In the household, that's where it starts. And that's why it is important, it's critically important actually, I was going to say, to make sure kids see that power which is vested in women naturally, and then get to respect that, so that when they come into the real world, in the society out there, they don't have that bias against women.
So it really starts early.
Very early.
What is the role of media in helping to change perceptions that differ from the principles and values you've articulated? And since you're in the media, how do you see the role of media in helping to break down some of these norms and practices, but to further the understanding and essentially help people to understand the value of women, not just within the home, but in the economic space?
Well, I have held the view for a long time now that we really need a mental revolution when it comes to the media. Because, first and foremost, forget about social media now, right? But just go back to traditional media for a minute. before considering social media and new media. I mean, traditionally, at least where I come from, people say, oh, I heard it on the radio, I saw it on TV, I read it in the newspaper, so it's true. That's what people say, used to say, and still say to a large extent. Therefore, if you are vested with the responsibility to own or work or have any influence on a news organization, something people refer to and say, it's true because it came from there, it is then critically important to make sure they understand dynamics going on into any society they are, so that they can play the role, which is really, at the foundation of any media, which is the watchdog role first, before even dissemination. So that's why, actually, I've always believed that media has an absolutely important role to play with this. First and foremost, we need to make sure news organizations can identify and actually project to the society examples where people would be proud of women's successes. So that are success stories, because there are plenty. And they don't need to be CEOs of, for instance, Fortune 100. But even at a micro level, the lady who is sitting at the market selling vegetables, but thanks to her, taking her kids to school, paying for uniform, paying for tuition, extra, and giving daily examples for her children to be successful. I mean, that's a great story. Unfortunately, it's not a sexy story which would make it through the TV or newspaper or on radio. But you need to even start from there. Second, a couple of years ago, when I founded something called African Media Initiative, we championed leadership and guiding principles for media owners and operators. Why? Simply because if you looked at the leadership in news organizations, most were male. I mean, you'll find, female in a news organization, but not at the echelons where it would matter for them to have an impact on the way the news organization is run, the direction. One of the examples I give where it mattered for those news organizations which adopted the leadership and guiding principles for media owners and operators is that, there was a large advertising campaign for one of the biggest fast-moving and consumer goods organizations, where women were not really presented in the way which were, adequate. In one instance, in Kenya, the advertising director was a lady. She blocked that ad to appear in the newspaper because she didn't agree with that. Now, the sales people already had it. The commercial director already approved it. But the advertising director saw it and blocked it. And it was very important because that message, it was being perpetuated in news organizations. So it is important to have women at different echelons of news organizations play a role, and an important role of decision making, because they can have at their voice not only the role model of saying, okay, this is a woman who's leading this, but just being able to stamp yes or no on advertising campaigns, that's important. So again, media is critical because we need to make sure the stories are out, success stories. We need to make sure also where there are concerns, media raises loud alarm bells against those concerns. And last but not least, making sure that women are at the forefront of these news organizations are important. And the good news is we're talking about traditional media, but now there's new media. And you'll find more and more women, ladies, including younger ladies, younger girls, who have huge numbers of followers on social networks. And that's very important, and that's important because it would help change perceptions.
You touched on the new media and the prevalence of young voices. Can I ask you to look, especially since Africa is the youngest continent in the world, right? And having the benefit of the youth bulge. How can media help to propel this transfer across generations as we now look to a new generation of leaders and actors? What's the role of media in helping to establish a dialogue, but also to help pave the way for what is to come, especially regarding women, their roles and their rights, and but more importantly, their value in economic system?
Well, if media is to remain relevant, particularly in the African context, it has to respond. It must respond to really big and critical issues the continent is facing currently. And one of them is actually the youth issue. Now, you mentioned it, it's right. In many African countries, you will have over 70% of the population which is under 30. In some countries, it's up to 80% under 25. So, that poses, at the same time, some opportunities, but also some challenges, because it needs to be addressed. Excuse me. So, and for media, therefore, to stay relevant, they need to address these big issues. Now, obviously, even media houses, have this structural issue in the pyramids of age using it. So, because more and more are young, and at the top you'll find some, not so young people, including me, myself. So, but ultimately, let's put it this way. We have seen, and just discussing before starting this interview, that in Africa, for instance, there's a great center called the Center for SDGs in Africa. And we are working with them, we as AllAfrica, but not just AllAfrica as an institution, AllAfrica in partnership with 150 news organizations. We are working currently on looking at the SDGs, looking at among all the aspects, which, of course, the youth is central throughout the SDGs, and looking at how we can help make sure the continent is making progress towards 2030. Because from next year, we get to 2020. Last 10 years. And it is critical that you can shine the light as news organizations on the successes, and at the same time raise, sound loud alarm bells on, where we're lagging behind, where the challenges are. So, and I think, looking at all of the dynamics which are going on the continent and looking at specifically the youth issue and how it translates through from SDG 1 to SDG 17, it is critical that media organizations come together and use two excellent tools they have. One is the power to tell the stories, and two is the convening power. You combine those two so that you bring stakeholders from, of course, government, private sector, academia, civil society, to really look at the realities of what's going on in our countries, so that, even if you don't have 100% success in the SDGs, you'll be as close as possible to it. And the only way this can happen is media plays those two roles and then keep being the watchdog and hold all those stakeholders to account. I think it's critical. That's the only way for progress. If not, there's no much hope, and we must have the hope. We must project that hope.
Absolutely. I would like to ask a final question, and that relates to, it builds on what you've said so far, actually. What is it that over the next year, you personally and through AllAfrica will commit to doing to advance progress on SDG 5, especially on the continent of Africa?
Well, so I'll touch back on the project I was just mentioning, which I'm spearheading at the moment. It's called Malengo, and it concerns all SDGs, but obviously there's a specific interest for me on SDG 5, and I always have my pin with me. So that is critical. But beyond that, what we are really looking at, what I'm hoping to do, is strengthen through this initiative the platform AllAfrica has in French and in English to show more and more success stories, because ultimately, it's all about showing success stories, advocacy, and more advocacy, a little bit more advocacy, and always advocacy. It is critical, showing what's happening there and being able to really, give voice to success stories from women and girls. And you know what? More and more, Margot, I'm convinced that, the young girls empowering their voice from, as soon as they can speak, basically, is where you would also have a big and bigger change. Because as human beings, when you consider, okay, she's 4, she's 5, and then nobody pays attention, by the time she's 16 or 15 or 12, she's used to being discounted. But empowering them from when they're growing up, making sure that they have the comfort to express and to say what they have in their minds, that strengthens them, and that would make a huge difference. I mean, especially again in the African context where, when you are young, whether you're a boy or a girl, when you're young, you're young, okay. I think, again, there's a radical shift which is needed. And I'm hopeful, and I really want to end on that note. So, looking at women's empowerment on the continent, I am convinced that we will get to a point where we see concrete results which uplift the continent as a whole, societies and countries and the continent as a whole. It has already started, but we need to accelerate it. We need more men and more women working together to make it a reality. And I'm convinced it would happen.
Thank you. That's so empowering itself.
Thank you.
Very